They gave me Apache twin sisters as slaves as a reward, but I didn't use them. I let them be free. The day they handed them to me as a reward, the desert felt heavier than usual, as if the land itself was watching in silence. The fight between the settlers and the Apache band had ended at dawn, not with honor, but with exhaustion and blood soaked into the dust. Men celebrated survival more than victory. Horses were tied, rifles leaned against wagons, and bodies, both living and dead, were counted without ceremony. That was when someone pushed the two women forward and said they were mine now. Spoken as casually as one might offer a saddle or a sack of grain, they were twins, unmistakably so. Same dark hair falling loose over their shoulders, same sharp cheekbones, same eyes that carried fear and fire at the same time. Their wrists were not bound, yet they stood close, enough to each other that it was clear neither would run without the other. One held the other's arm tightly, not trembling, but firm. As if anchoring herself to something real in a moment that felt unreal. They did not cry. They did not plead. They simply looked at me, measuring the kind of man I was going to be. I had seen prisoners before. I had seen fear before. But this was different. There was no begging in their eyes, only readiness. Readiness for whatever cruelty might come next. That was what unsettled me most. Men around us laughed, slapped my back, told me I had been blessed twice over. They spoke of rewards as if lives could be weighed like silver. I nodded because that was what was expected, but something inside me tightened like a rope pulled too far. They were called Apache by everyone else, as if that single word erased everything else they were. No one asked their names. No one cared where they came from or what they had lost that morning. To the others, they were trophies, proof that the fight had been worth it. To me, standing there with their eyes fixed on mine, they felt like a question I could not ignore. I led them away from the camp because that was what one did with possessions. The noise faded behind us, replaced by the sound of our footsteps and the dry wind moving through scrub and dust. They followed without resistance, but I could feel the tension in every step they took. When we stopped, they knelt together on the ground without being told, shoulders touching, heads held high despite the posture forced upon them by habit and survival. It was clear they had learned long ago how to endure without breaking. I studied them longer than I should have. Their expressions were guarded but not empty. There was intelligence there and memory, and something unspoken passing between them without words. Sisters who had survived together this long had a language deeper than speech. I realized then that whatever had happened before today, whatever losses they carried, they still had each other. And that bond was something no reward should have had the power to claim. The camp rules were simple and brutal. What was taken in war belonged to the victor. Mercy was considered weakness, and weakness invited death. I had lived by those rules long enough to know their cost. I had followed orders, taken land, and watched men justify horrors by calling them necessary. But standing there with those two women kneeling in the dirt, the weight of those justifications finally pressed down on me in a way I could not shake. One of the twins met my gaze directly, her eyes steady, unblinking. There was no challenge in them, only a quiet truth. Whatever I chose next would define more than just their fate. It would define mine. For the first time in years, I felt the lie crack. That survival required cruelty. That power came from taking rather than choosing not to. I did not know yet what I would do, but I knew I could not see them as others did. They were not spoils. They were people caught in a story written by violence. And I was now holding the pen for the next chapter. I did not untie them because there had been no ropes to cut. Instead, I stepped back, creating distance. And that alone seemed to confuse them more than any command could have. Silence stretched between us. The kind of silence that waits to see who will speak first, who will act, who will decide what kind of world this moment belongs to. The twins exchanged a brief glance, quick, practiced, full of meaning, and then looked back at me, ready for whatever came next. I built a small fire as the sun dipped lower, not because I needed warmth, but because routine gave me time to think. They remained where they were, still, alert, their bodies tense like drawn bows. I could feel the history pressing in around us. Generations of blood spilled, promises broken, people turned into property by the simple act of declaring victory. I had been part of that machine for too long, telling myself I had no choice. That lie felt thin now. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded unfamiliar even to me. I told them they were free to stand. For a moment, neither moved. Freedom, when it comes without pain attached, can feel like another trick. Slowly, one of them rose, then the other, never breaking eye contact with me. I gestured toward the open land, toward the direction where the hills softened into distance. I told them they could go. No conditions, No debt, no tracking, just go. Suspicion crossed their faces before relief ever could. One of them spoke then, her voice steady but edged with disbelief. She asked why. It was a fair question, and I realized I did not have a clean answer. I could have said guilt. I could have said mercy. I could have said I was tired of being what others expected. Instead, I told the truth as best. I understood it, because keeping them would turn me into someone I no longer wanted to be. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, cattle lowed, and the sounds of the camp were barely echoes now. The twins stood close together as they always had, weighing my words the way one weighs a bridge before crossing it. Finally, they nodded, not in gratitude, but in acceptance. They understood choice. They understood consequences. One of them reached down, picked up a small stone, and placed it carefully on the ground between us. A marker, a memory, something to say this moment had happened and mattered. They did not rush away. They walked slow and deliberate, never looking back, their figures growing smaller against the wide land until they blended into it. Watching them go, I felt no triumph. What I felt was quieter, heavier, and far more permanent. A line had been crossed, not by them, but by me. And there was no returning to who I had been before. When I went back to camp, questions came fast and sharp. Where were they? Why had I returned alone? I gave no long explanations. I said they were gone. Some laughed, some cursed, some looked at me as if I had wasted a prize. Let them. I had learned that day that not everything lost is a loss. Some things are shed like old skin, painful to remove but necessary to survive. That night, sleep did not come easily. I kept seeing their faces not as prisoners, but as they were when they walked away, upright, unbroken, choosing their own direction. It haunted me in a way violence never had, because it showed me another path had always existed, and I had simply refused to see it. In the days that followed, I noticed the world did not end because of my choice. The sun still rose. Work still needed doing. Men still fought and argued and justified themselves. But something in me had shifted. I spoke less. I watched more. And every time I saw someone reduced to a thing instead of a person, I remembered the twins disappearing into the land, carrying nothing but each other and the right to decide their own fate. That was the reward I kept. Not ownership, not power, but the knowledge that even in a world built on taking, a single act of letting go could change the shape of a man's soul.